Ja, men jeg tænker, vi vil starte nu. Godmorgen. Som Niels han sagde, det er klokken 9 om morgenen, lidt tidligt for et webinar, men vi håber, at det vil være en god session. Vi synes i hvert fald, at vi har fået noget spændende indhold sat sammen, og glæder os til at dele det med jer. Jeg vil køre min præsentation på dansk. Niels han vil køre sin præsentation på engelsk. Så hvis der er nogen, der ønsker, at jeg skal skrive eller tage det på engelsk også, så må I lige række en hånd op eller skrive i chatten. Mit navn er Esben Dahl Nielsen. Jeg er administrerende direktør for Logic i Danmark. Vi er et selskab, der startede i Danmark i september sidste år. Vi har eksisteret i Norge siden 2007 og i Sverige siden 2020. Så vi er et selskab, der har fokus på to hovedområder, og det ene hovedområde det er sikkerhed, og det andet hovedområde er netværk. Vi har en bred kundebase både fra teleselskaber og service provider generelt. Vi har universiteter, vi har sågar nogle af trebogstavsforkortelserne inden for forsvar og politi, og er godt i gang der. Vi har haft en forrygende start i Danmark. Det har været et virkelig travlt år, og vi er kommet virkelig godt i gang her. Vores webinar i dag, det handler om NIS2, og det er sammen med Armis, fordi det er en af vores rigtig gode samarbejdspartnere, hvor Niels han kommer fra, og han vil fortælle noget omkring Armis' løsning. Jeg vil så lave en hurtig indflyvning til, hvad er NIS2 egentlig? Jamen, altså det er jo en opfølgning af NIS1, som er et direktiv om netværk og netværks- og informationssikkerhed, eller informationssystemer. Og det har det overordnede mål for NIS2, og også var mål for NIS1, er, at det skal sikre EU sikre EU's nationale netværk og informationssystemer. Og man kan sige, at en af de ting, som ændrer sig meget i NIS2-direktivet, er, at man udvider scopet, og det kommer jeg lidt tilbage til. Hvem er det egentlig, der har pligt og forventning for pligt til at implementere NIS2? Og det er vigtigt at forstå også, at lovteksten er ikke endelig færdig endnu. Den er ikke fuldt implementeret endnu, men der kommer krav til, at det skal være implementeret i løbet af næste år. Men man kan sige, at cybersikkerhed flytter ind i jorden. Aben er hos ledelsen. Det kræver ledelsens opmærksomhed, og man kan ikke påstå, at man ikke kan til en trussel. Og det er en af de andre vigtige ting ved NIS2. Sådan som det ser ud i øjeblikket, så er det den her gruppe af forskellige industrier og typer af virksomheder, der kommer til at blive omfattet af NIS2. Og der er jo vigtige enheder og væsentlige enheder, den måde man opgør det på. Og det er jo klart, at med hvordan man ser verden er ved at udvikle sig også, bare trusselbilledet, vi får østfra, gør jo, og hele diskussionen, der har været meget diskussion i Danmark omkring, hvor er vores fiberkabler og sådan nogle ting. Men det er jo ikke fordi, at det bliver omfattet af den her del, men der er en lovgiverne og politikerne har en meget øget fokus på, at der er et øget trusselbillede, og det bliver vi nødt til at forholde os til, og det er også derfor, man indfører NIS2. Jamen, hvilke krav stiller NIS2 så? Sådan i overskriftsform, der er det, at det er ledelsens ansvar. Ledelsen kan ikke fraskrive sig ansvaret længere. Ledelsen har ansvar for, at man er bekendt med direktivet, og man ved, hvordan man, eller at man har fuld kontrol over organisationens risikostyring. Og netop risikostyring og håndtering, det er jo det, der er en af de ting, der stilles krav om i NIS2. Men vigtigt er også, at det faktisk ikke kun ens egen virksomhed eller egen organisation, der har, man skal have fokus på. Det er også for underleverandører. Man skal også overveje at have en risikovurdering af de leverandører, som man anvender sig af. Og det er faktisk noget, vi her i Logic, det er en af de ting, som vi bliver mødt af hos nogle af vores kunder, fordi vi har en del kunder, som opererer nationale netværk, og det bliver vi mødt af jævnligt, at vi skal gå ind og dokumentere, hvordan vi har vores risikostyring. Og så er der noget omkring rapportering, og der er kontinuitet i virksomheden, og så sidst men ikke mindst, så er der jo så nogle sikkerhedsforanstaltninger for netværk og informationssikkerhed, og det er jo der, hvor vi begynder at nærme os noget af det, som hvad det hedder, Armis kan hjælpe os med, og det er egentlig nogle af de ting her. Det her det er artikel 21, som fortæller lidt omkring de tekniske og organisatoriske krav til, hvad er det egentlig virksomheden skal kunne håndtere. Og nu vil jeg ikke sidde og læse listen op her, men der er en god portion elementer i det, og der er rigtig meget af det, som Armis kan hjælpe os med. And now I will switch to English because I would like to introduce Niels, who will take us through Armis' view on how they can help on preparing yourself for NIS2. So over to you, Niels.
All right, thank you. If I need to have the share though, so you need to stop. There we go. All right, let's go share slideshow. So do you see my screen, full screen?
Yes, we do. Yes,
awesome, great stuff. So I'm Niels von Grege. I'm a solution architect at Armis since a year and a half. I have a background in various other vendors. Sentinel 4 years, was at Tanium, also endpoint protection and security, was at Fortinet 4 years as a manager. So been around the block from the security vendors. Today I'm going to talk about our platform called Centrix, which is a discovery and risk management platform for all your assets. But we're specifically going to talk how this maps out to NIS and give some kind of good ideas and recommendation on what to do and what not to do to kind of be as compliant as you can towards the law. So first off, I just want to strike like a tone for our the state of cyber warfare report that we do once a year. It's verticalized, so it's for OT, it's for medical, and it's for general IT in the same report. It's pretty interesting to read. It's based on testimonials, not only statistics. So people's actual like experiences working in IT security that we interview. And it's free of charge. So just go look for cyber warfare, Armis, Google that, and you can get a pretty nice free report. So I am an OT expert. That's my game within Armis. So I work primarily with manufacturing and critical infrastructure. So my kind of presentation will be a bit focused on that. We do other things, and we'll get into that too. So one thing that it's never letting up these days is the pressure and growth of IT systems and things connected. So today we see around 23 billion devices connected in the world. In just 2 years, we're looking at very close to doubling that. So we're getting almost into a logarithmic growth here long term. So it's a lot of new assets coming in that we need to secure, manage, and understand. 80% of all devices are not managed. Those are not PCs, basically. They're not existing in a system where you kind of understand what it is. and somebody typically don't have responsibility. So here it could be anything. It could be like OT devices, PLCs, engineering workstations, that kind of thing, but also IoT and building management system. And building management systems are maybe the devices that is most overlooked in any organization. Nobody really feels like real ownership of those type of devices. So things like heat, ventilation, air conditioning, power controllers, lighting controllers, that kind of thing. Almost everybody working in IT security and IT feels that it's a rapid change all the time with the type of devices and amount of devices, which makes it hard to get good coverage and understand it. But this is a kind of the base in all security framework, and so also NIS2 is to understand what you have, what devices are connected. That's like the base plate of being able to do anything security-wise. So this is a huge problem, and we need to address that. If we look at OT systems specifically, more than half of them have vulnerabilities that are pretty bad, medium, high to critical at any given time. And it's in the nature of OT systems. They tend to be very old because if you produce something like in a factory, it's a machine that's been there for 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And, you know, it's owned by a manufacturer that's supposed to do maintenance on it, but it's really hard because that operating system that it uses, it's end of life and things like that. So in OT, vulnerabilities is more of a problem than IT. And ask IT people what they think is their major problem. They're going to say vulnerabilities. So it kind of it becomes a huge issue in OT because you can't really manage it in a good way. While in IT, at least you have a chance. So in OT environments and ransomware specifically, it's targeting OT environments these days. It's not like opportunistic anymore. There's ransomware for PLCs basically these days, designed to run on that kind of infrastructure. A few things that is interesting here is that the ransomware payout is higher in OT environment than in IT environments. Because downtime and like availability is critical in OT environments, so it's easier to extract money from an OT environment than from an IT environment. And the longer you can hold ransom, the more cost it generates. So basically, it's more efficient to do ransomware in OT companies than in IT. There is one business or one vertical that is even worse, and that's healthcare. Like hospitals, those payouts are even bigger. One thing here to note is also the time to recovery, the downtime basically of an OT environment that is ransomware. Even if you don't choose to pay, it's still 21 days on average. That's like a month loss of production. And I think most of you working with the OT environments know the cost of that. It's not acceptable in any way. So we need to kind of address security in OT in a way that IT has done for a fairly long time, and OT have tried to kind of avoid by doing things like air gapping and isolation. But we're in a connected world these days, and that doesn't work anymore. So we need to do more security in OT. And NIS2 gives us actually a chance to do that. It's a validation that we need to do it. So if you look at a security team, how do they view the world? Like what's important? So it's the only old CIA triad. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability in that order for a corporate enterprise environment. So confidentiality is the most important, that the data is secured and only the individuals that should have access to the data have access to the data. And so for integrity, that's second, and availability is kind of best effort here. It's great, like if it works, it works, but that's not the priority. The priority is confidentiality. So that's what it looks like in a typical IT environment. In OT, it's kind of different. It's AIC. Availability is the only thing anybody cares about. Stuff needs to run 24/7. While integrity and confidentiality is confidentiality, we don't care in OT, to be honest. The protocols we use are kind of interesting, uninteresting. Everything is unencrypted. It's just based on to be able to produce as effectively as possible and have availability at top notch all the time. So this gives challenges, because working this way does not really map out well with NIS2 requirements or other compliance frameworks. So we in OT, we kind of need to change our ways a little bit here and understand that there are new requirements coming in. So the typical security workflow from like a SOC or incident response, like identify, protect, that's your kind of pre-work you need to do. You need to understand what you have, and you need to protect those assets with different means and controls. Detect and respond. Well, if something happens, we need to detect it, and we need to be able to respond and understand what's going on, and that leads to recovery, which is basically operations job to get the things back up and running. And this is a continuous cycle. So from a workflow perspective, we have the pre-breach, that's our homework. The better we do this, the less problems we have with breach and post-breach work. Because pre-breach work is basically what Armis does. We manage risk and understand the environment. While not that sexy and maybe not that fun all the time, it's very effective. Because once you get into the fun stuff, which is breach, where incident responders get involved, you're in a pretty bad spot. It's exciting work and all that, but it's very, very intense. And the recovery time is the worst part, because it's just trying to get back as soon as possible. And this is just cost, basically, that could have possibly have been avoided by doing proper pre-breach work. So what we're saying here is like we need to shift a bit to not have tools for breach detection, which is the most, your EDRs and your IPSs and firewalls and things like that. We need to focus more on the hygiene, which is the pre-breach work. So what kind of measures do we have then to do the controls and understand and all this? And it's different in different type of environments. So IT have a way of working, OT have another way of working. For example, OT people would be like CIS critical security controls. No, thank you. We work with IEC 62443, which is a great framework when it comes to process integrity and having a factory doing production. But it's not a great framework when it comes to traditional security, where CIS critical security controls is much more important. So, okay, we kind of need to bridge this gap. We need to start working not only with industrial type of framework, but also more security conscious or more security, I'd say IT security frameworks. And this is kind of interesting, because if we look at NIS and this, it becomes, one would almost think that somebody has read up on things when writing the NIS requirements. Because if we look at the CIS controls, CIS is, the CIS security controls is a framework to work structured and systematically with IT security. And it's done in basic steps, like if you're an IG1, which is basically the kind of typical enterprise company, you maybe do retail or trade or transportation or logistics and, important stuff, but not critical. Then you can do basic hygiene and kind of get away with that for a good time. IG2 is more governmental, education, university kind of style. It's more controls with better feature sets. And ID3 is the kind of most expansive way of doing this. But it all maps out into security controls, like stuff you need to do. And if we look at the actual controls for ID3, they map out very well towards NIS requirements. You could argue maybe this was written based NIS2 based on requirements in ID3. That's how well it maps out. It's not a perfect fit, but it's very close. So maybe it could be as simple as like if we implement our security controls for ID3, we might well be very, very compliant with the law here. Could it really be this simple? Yeah, it certainly looks like it for me from a security perspective. Problem here is that this is a law. We don't really know what it means until we have some judging on it, and we're going to see in the next 5-10 years what that means. But to kind of get going and understand, I think ID3 is the way to go to map out against NIS2. There are specific things you need to look into here, like that isn't covered, that is non-IT system, like personnel and qualifying people and that kind of thing. That is not included in ID3, but mostly you're pretty good to go if you follow it. So if we look into the actual controls and what they do and how it works. So it's for ID3, it's 18 controls. Some of this you can't do in OT environments, it's impossible. Some of it are not necessary to do, but most of them are really good. And Armis maps out very well our product, the company I work for, to support in getting these controls in place. Things like the most important one and the first one, a complete enterprise asset inventory and inventory of all systems, IoT, OT, building management, and so on. Software assets, like what kind of software and version we use, that is something we can support. Data protection, sure, in some way. Security configuration, like have we configured our devices in a good way? We can help with that. Account management and so on. So all these security controls together make for a really strong security solution. And also it fills a lot of the requirements in NIS2. So if you feel like I don't know where to start, maybe we don't work structured with security in a good way. A lot of companies do work opportunistic and we buy things to kind of help us detect and do things. That is not really the way to go. The tools are necessary, but the tools should be there to fulfill these controls, basically. For example, EDR and malware, that is just a single control. It's not good enough to kind of say that we will be compliant with the law. It's a step on the way, sure, but it also needs to work. That is some requirement you actually have. So, for example, if you just buy the flashiest, latest EDR, and it turns out that you didn't know it didn't work or it wasn't installed on a set of machines, and you get breached, you might end up in trouble because you didn't do your homework. So these security controls is really good to look at and understand how they apply to your requirements and your environment. For example, things you can't do. You can't do penetration testing in an OT environment. That is just too risky. So that is something we have to note that we couldn't do, but we took that into account. That could be good enough for a court trial, maybe. Hope that makes sense to you guys. But it's a great start. Like CIS controls is typically something we haven't really discussed in OT environments. But if we start doing this, that will mostly fulfill our NIS2 requirements. So just as an example how this actually works in reality is we have the implementation groups, the IDs. So ID1 is the lowest, second, and third, and we're in third with critical infrastructure and you know the NIS2 required stuff. So all these controls are pretty well defined. They may or may not apply to your environment, but that's fine. If it doesn't apply, you can just ignore it. But if we look at IG1, for example, there are some requirements that make sense. You need an enterprise asset inventory, a CMDB, basically. And it could be as simple as we only have AD computers that are attached. Well, then you have checked that box for IG1 because you have an asset inventory. So that's great. It could be address unauthorized assets, sure, but then you need to understand what an unauthorized asset is and how you need to find it. And that's more tricky, right? That you can't really do with your AD and so on. If we look at ID2, it gets more intricate because here you need active discovery tools. And it also claims that you need to do this through DHCP logging, for example. It gets pretty technical, but still, it's based on active stuff, right? Something needs to happen. You need to go out and scan, or you need to log it from a system that logs it. So that makes sense. When it comes to ID3, there is a requirement that is very specific, and it makes sense. Use a passive asset discovery tool, something that is passive. It does not send packets to devices, because that requires devices to answer. So if you want to hide from a discovery tool, well, you have a firewall on your device that you can't see it. That you can't do with passive discovery, because your device needs to talk to something, so it won't be invisible. So that's the key to a passive asset discovery tool, is to understand the devices that are on the network, regardless if they're on a management or not, or if they're trying to hide or not. So passive is a key word for ID3, and I think this for critical infrastructure is incredibly important. A lot of people also talk about, well, we work with ISO 27000 and so on. Yeah, but it's not really security. It's a lot of things that is good for a company, like how they work with software and things like that. But it's not like securing an environment. It's not good for that. You should look at a security conscious framework that is really focused on the network and assets in it. So that would be CIS. Then there are more like NIST and other frameworks too. But I think that CIS controls makes most sense because it's pretty simple and straightforward. Right. So what do we understand here? Well, with ID3 and critical infrastructure, we really need to do passive discovery. That's the takeaway from this, the first control. There is 18 more, so it's a lot of work here, but it's a great start to have an asset discovery tool that can enrich your CMDB or become your CMDB. That's what we at Armis does. So the pain points in IT, IoT, OT environments is basically attack surface expansion. Stuff is growing, like we're adding new things into our operations. A factory is typically very static, but the difference is now we're adding more stuff into it that is connected, and we're also allowing people in. We didn't used to do that. It used to be air-gapped on a separate network. It didn't even have a DNS server. Everything was statically configured. That has changed in the last decade. And we're now, it's a much more fluid environment with another set of problems. We are getting audits now. That wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago for the OT side. We need to comply. NIS is one of them, but there's also other audits. And that also requires us to work with other compliance frameworks, such as IEC 62443, which is a great framework when it comes to production security, not so much for IT security. One thing that is also showing up a lot is the convergence of IT and OT. I see this all the time when talking to companies, that OT is trying to do IT and IT is trying to do OT, and it's a culture shock. It's two different ways of working. So if you're good at OT security, you're likely not that good at IT security, and opposite. When you work in IT security, you're probably good at that, but you don't really fully understand the requirements in an OT environment. But there is no way around this. With NIS2, we are getting the same IT type of requirements for OT, and we need to address that. Also, there is a convergence of type of devices here that it often gets overlooked. A lot of like OT security products are like, we secure the OT environment. Yes, but there is a lot in the OT environment that are not OT systems that are production critical. For example, building management systems. Like, it doesn't matter what you produce and how well your process integrity work is done and everything. If your heat, ventilation, air condition, power controllers, or lighting systems gets knocked out, your production stops. So the risk is the same for building management system in an OT environment as well as the OT stuff itself. I don't think that hackers really have understood this. Maybe they're not used to working in factories and things. Because if I did ransomware, I would definitely target the building management system because it's simpler and they're usually not secured at all. Which is kind of another reason why we need to look at security control for more than OT stuff within a producing environment. Right. So what are the riskiest devices? Well, it's not your PLC. PLC has a risk, of course, to as it could have vulnerabilities and things like that. But there is IT devices within OT environments that are the most riskiest device, regardless of where you place them. Like IP cameras and printers are absolutely in a bad place. Like most printers that are network connected have vulnerabilities such as Ripple 20. It's a hardware vulnerability that you can't really patch away. So a lot of these devices are also part of botnets, specifically IP cameras tend to do that because they're not that greatly secured. They're usually running old code based on old Linux kernels. And they are vulnerable to wormable botnet attacks. VoIP devices are also fairly common. I wouldn't say that VoIP devices are common in OT environments. They're not, but it's a high risk type of device. So if they are, they need to be secured by segmentation or isolation or some kind of security control to get that under check so they can't connect to OT devices. But all of these devices are fairly common in factories. Like you have your printers and your IP cameras, they are there. And hopefully they're segmented out. But I wouldn't just trust somebody because they told me that. I would like to verify that myself. So Armis, what do we do here? What's our thing in all of this? And basically, we are generalists when it comes to asset discovery and asset intelligence to understand what devices are and what they do. So sure, we do IoT and OT security. That's one of our core pillars to do. But we also do medical security, like hospitals and medical production, which is more on the OT side. It's in the US, we kind of see a trend that they now call medical devices OT. Because basically they should be managed the same way that we manage factory stuff. So that's a trend change that we see, that there is a realization that these type of devices that are important for production are the same in a factory as well as a hospital. They need to be managed in the same way, basically. We also do generalist like IT discovery, like all your systems that are connected. We're completely agnostic. We try to understand what everything is on a network. So we have that part too. Another thing we do is vulnerability prioritization and remediation. Now, we're not a vulnerability management system per se. You still need to do that, or we don't do like pen testing type of or vulnerability scanning. That's not our game, but we can still understand if there are vulnerabilities on devices. And since Armis know a lot about what the devices are, what they're used for, who owns them, where they're connected and so on, we can also manage the risk around a vulnerability. So think of it, if you have a critical vulnerability with a remote code execution, which is exploited in the wild, that's pretty bad. But it's not a big risk if it's on a regular Windows machine that's in a lab and it's turned on like 2-3 times a year. It's still fairly low risk for the company. On the other hand, if that exact same vulnerability is on your authentication servers, or if they are on a device that's very exposed, like it might be internet published and connected to the internet, or it might be a very critical system, that risk is much, much higher. And here is where Armis helps out. Because by knowing what devices are used for and being able to kind of tell Armis what are your most critical devices, you can help yourself by prioritizing the patching work to the devices that has the most criticality in form of or risk in form of the vulnerabilities, but also the devices that are most exposed or most vulnerable. And this is easy wins. If you look at a traditional company, if you can do that, like the 20 worst patches or maybe 50 worst, you're going to likely be down to single digits in the number of devices that has the critical vulnerabilities. That is not on a lot of devices, which lowers the exposure of the risk to the company a lot. So this is super hard to do, by the way, normally. Typical vulnerability management work is doing, an IP address and the vulnerability because your vulnerability scanner told you, but you have no idea about the context. So Basically, you're just trying to patch every single critical vulnerability, regardless of what system it is, and that is not an effective way to work. So vulnerability prioritization is a big thing, and it really helps companies to understand the risk of the devices they have. So what else do we do? Advantage. Well, a deep visibility into all OT assets. OT assets are typically not in a CMDB. They are on isolated networks, hopefully, or even air-gapped networks in some cases. That is getting more and more uncommon, but it still happens. But basically, they're not managed and they're not really known. So what we do is we give an understanding in what all these devices are, what they are used for, and how they are used. On top of that, we can do threat analysis and hygiene within the OT environment. Like we can see if devices get attacked, we can see the relationship between devices, and if the devices connect to devices they shouldn't be connected to. So for example, if you have IT style of things like IP cameras and printers or regular workstation connecting into your OT environment, that is something we can flag a risk around and to be addressed. We also do behavioral detections, like understanding that devices are doing things that they typically shouldn't, like using protocols that is abnormal or not standard for that type of device. So this is like if you look at the OT security landscape, this is basically what we do or our competitors does. But this one, the maximize productivity with process integrity. So process integrity is a very OT specific word. Basically, it's hygiene around how your things work. Like, don't do changes out of service windows or production stops. One thing. Are there protocol errors? Do we have network problems? Things that could affect our process in producing things. And this is something that is not security related. This is production related, but Armis can help out with this. So this also means that we play in different verticals within a company, because these are the guys who's producing stuff. They want to know about the process integrity and potential problems. It's not security related, it's production related, and we fulfill that gap also. And of course, vulnerability prioritization, also in OT and IoT type of system, and lifecycle management. Lifecycle management can be really hard in OT environments, because there's, from time to time, there's stuff you can't really change. Like you're going to find a lot of stuff like XP, or if it's really bad, you can find some machines with Windows NT still running, because the machine was sold with that. It hasn't been touched in 25 years, 30 years. And the company who sold it doesn't exist anymore. So as long as that machine is running, we can't do anything with it. We still can manage risk around it, of course, but lifecycle management is possible. But there's also things like firmwares that can be updated, that is part of lifecycle management, that we also do, like understanding what firmware versions is running and can flag that you are running out of support or end-of-life firmwares on these PLCs. So it could be a quick win just to update them and get them under support again. So a lot of hygiene apart from security. There is also different requirements for different parts of kind of. So if you look at aviation, they have different requirements than your typical critical infrastructure. They're still considered critical under NIS2, but the requirements are different. And we really map well out in any type of business. We do things like in Sweden, we have logistics companies that are under NIS2 requirements because they are logistics for food, like cooling transport. Their set of requirements are very different from oil and gas energy production company. But Armis maps out in all these 40 different sub-industries as well as medical. So if we look at like visibility is the key for any compliance framework and also for NIS2. Like if we don't understand what we have, and if we don't understand the state of the things we have, things like what modules are installed, what firmware are we running, what run mode is configured, we are exposing ourselves for problems. And before NIS2, it was operational integrity. Like if we're on attack, our availability will go down, which would cost money, and that's bad. With NIS2, there is a legal requirement for your specific like critical infrastructure and medical and things like that, that actually fines you if you didn't do your homework. And it's all based on visibility. If you don't have that base plate, you're going to have a really hard time explaining to your kind of your government why you didn't do that job. So having asset discovery and asset intelligence, just understand what things you have, what they do, and what state they are in, covers you a lot of that. And of course, on a side point, it's also good for the IT hygiene to understand what problems you have and risks you have. Things that you can't really do in like industrial and OT environments is things like you can't install agents. A PLC doesn't have that function. HMI panel, you can't install things on it. Even an engineering workstation, you often can't install an EDR on because you don't own it. It's part of a system that's sold by Siemens or ABB or Rockwell. So you basically rent it and they tell you what could be included here. So it's super important that you have an agentless way of doing this by typically passive discovery and monitoring network traffic. I think that all systems today that are focused on OT are doing this already. Us and all our competitors, of course. But if you look at typical IT discovery type of the systems and solutions, they don't do that. They do active discovery, like sending packets or trying to sweep the network to see what's installed. And that comes with a set of problems. First off, you can't do it in OT environments because you're going to knock down your PLCs and affect production. And actually, the OT guys won't let you do it either. They won't let you into that kind of environment. So passive discovery is the way to go there. But also, active discovery only gives you a snapshot. It's only when you scan something and ask for it, you get a state from that device. Once you get that data, it's immediately stale because that IP address might have changed. It might be another device, or some other state around the device might have changed. So you're always looking at outdated data. And that is something that agentless profiling and basically a passive discovery helps with, because you always have a current state of the environment, not something that was done 6 or 10 weeks ago, which helps. And that is one of the major use cases for Armis, is enriching CMDBs. Because CMDBs, we buy the service now, so the BMCs, and they say, I use our module to scan your network, and they go out and actively scan it, and hopefully you get some kind of data that is pretty good, but it's immediately outdated. So one of the major use cases for using Armis, not only to discover tool, but also enrich your CMDB with information about the device set and the current device set that you have. So I think I'll stop there. And I don't know, has there been any questions, Espen?
No, there has not been any questions so far. So yeah.
All right. I'll be happy to do that. We're out of time now, by the way. I'm not going to go over 45 minutes. That's just boring. But, you know, if you want to see how we actually do this and how all these controls map into how we work with it in our system, it's pretty straightforward. We'll be more than happy to do a demo or show you around our systems and also map it to your use cases and your urgent needs. I mean, most likely you don't, you know, you already have some of these 18 controls in place. Like you don't have to map out all of it immediately, but it's highly likely that there are gaps that we could cover.
Yeah, and we will make the webinar available online. We have recorded it this morning here, so you can also share it internally in your organization if you want to. And as Niels said, we'll be more than happy to come and talk with you about this in more details and also give you a demonstration of it. So I think that is for us to conclude now. I hope you found it useful. Thank you very much, Niels, for doing the presentation. You're definitely carrying the big load here, so thank you for that. And thank you everybody for joining. So have a wonderful Thursday in a bit of gray Copenhagen, at least that's how my view is, but I hope you find a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your time.